All right. So moving forward, we need to talk a little bit about stocking rate reviews and review of the nutrition and production systems. I guess making sure we've got appropriate stocking rates for land facilities and business needs, some comments on dry and young stock review, and and in some situations, are there opportunities for people to expand, and we have seen that occur at the moment as well. From the nutrition's perspective, thinking carefully about feeding systems and facilities is very important. Thinking more globally about our current systems and do they restrict options and opportunities, and I guess we've seen a lot of that through the drought, where some people have been very locked into feed systems, which mean they're bound to get their concentrate from one supplier as a mixed feed, and they haven't necessarily been able to access other feeds that sit outside of hay or silage to help them during periods of drought when other feeds have been potentially much more cost effective and available than hay when things got very, very difficult. And again, just making sure your system is driven towards maximising feed conversion efficiency and focused on optimising margin over feed cost. So the stocking rate review, I guess one of the things we again came across in the drought around the millennium was some incredibly high stocking rates that have been driven up under some for a variety of reasons at the time, but there were a number of irrigation farms that were stocked at between 5 and 6 cows to the hectare. Now that was all very well and good when forage off farm was reasonably available and grain prices were cheap and there was an abundance of irrigation water, but those systems became very unstable once we lost access to water and purchase feed got expensive. And I guess there's an opportunity for people to really look at their own stocking rate very carefully and make sure that it's appropriate for their land, their facilities and business needs. And again, we won't go into how you do that in great depth at the moment, but I think if we ballpark estimated that most of our irrigated land can produce somewhere between 10 and 16 tonnes of dry matter, and depending on your feeding system, most cows are going to need at least 4 tonnes of dry matter of forage per head. We can quickly work backwards with those sort of numbers to say, well, if I'm growing 10 and I'm able to, and I need 4 per cow, then I can probably sit at about that 2.5 cows to the hectare quite comfortably. Now, there's going to be a lot of movement depending on people's input levels and whether or not they're driving for 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 or 10,000 litres per cow. And also a lot of balancing of that with their other facilities on farm and what their business actually needs to function with respect to debt servicing and other fixed costs. I'd really encourage people to take the time now to really critically look at their stocking rate and work out whether it is appropriate for their land facilities and their business requirements. Tremendous opportunity again to use data when reviewing stocking rate and cows. We've done a lot of data review during the recent drought to look at the cows that people are feeding and the choices they're making with respect to retaining and selling cows. If we look at this chart down here on the right, this is a chart from about a 600 cow herd that I work with, where we've basically taken their Dairy Express data, and this is available for anyone to download that herd records, where basically we've got milk yield here on the left and days in milk here on the right. Now our squares here, our orange squares, that represents all the cows in the herd, and the green represents all the 2-year-olds in the herd. But basically, you can look at any point in time, and we can look here at the cows that are 100 days of milk, and we can see that there is a huge range in productivity within these cows, okay? We've also got a line here which basically indicates the best fit line or the average of the herd. And from that, we can see all the yellows above here are above average, and all the yellows down here are below average. What it clearly demonstrates is that at all stages of lactation, we've got a number of cows that are well below average in this herd and in most herds. When we're looking at feed conversion efficiency and options for culling cows, with this sort of chart on Dairy Express, we can just click on any one of those spots. It'll take us to the cow card. And then we can start using that to give us some good guidance as to objective decision making as to which cows, apart from our normal reasons for culling, such as reproductive failure and somatic cell count, the chronic mastitis and lameness, may be candidates for a holiday elsewhere. And particularly in a situation where our cull prices are still very good, and our cash may be better off in our business preparing for what might be around the corner. So I guess I'd encourage you to use data and charts like this if you heard recording, or other options for improving your objective decision making with respect to culling. With respect to young stock, one of the major challenges we've seen with drought across New South Wales has not so much been feeding the milking herds. We've generally been able to turn a bit of a margin from that, but from the black hole in budgets that feeding large young stock herds creates. Unfortunately, that is a cost at the front end that doesn't generate a margin, but it's been a cost that we've had to bear on a lot of farms. And it's been very difficult financially to navigate as we've gone through the last 18 months. I think there's a lot of room in many herds to more quantitatively review how many young stock they are carrying, and have a very close look at this, because young stock can be a huge drain on feed inventories if they're getting short, and making sure that we are feeding the number of heifers that we need for our business to maintain itself, and then having a good business plan that may include things such as export or other options for surplus is very, very important. Otherwise, we can end up with a herd of 200 cows carrying 150 heifers underneath it, and that can be quite debilitating if we move into a dry time, or if we have to start hand feeding. I mean, the nice thing at the moment is that there is a fair bit of feed in dry land areas, and there's some pretty low cost opportunities for adjustment for rearing young stock, but they can dry up very quickly. Or with a good frost on a lot of that summer grass, the actual growth rates on those standing summer feeds can deteriorate very quickly as well. So again, we need to have a plan for managing surplus if we've got it. I guess the last point here is that there have been some opportunities taken by some farmers for expansion, under the current milk price, which is reasonable. Again, we don't know what's going to happen around the corner, particularly with the drought support payments. But if well set up, and your system is based on high feed conversion efficiency, and with a prospect of reasonable milk prices and reasonable feed prices moving into spring and summer, then there may be review for some people to review their stocking rates if they have run down during the last 2 years. But again, that's an individual choice that you should talk over with your family and your advisors. With respect to nutrition and production system reviews, feeding systems and facilities are critical. And I guess making sure, firstly, that we have systems that minimise waste, absolutely important. It's quite disturbing to see how much hay gets fed out on the ground. And from my experience, hay is a very expensive source of fertiliser on a lot of dairies. Looking at simple feeding systems like the racks, if we are doing a lot of hay feeding, can preserve a lot of forage, and making sure that they're well kept and functional, and there are enough there for the herd is an important option if we do move into hay feeding again. Again, not necessarily advocating that everyone goes out and sets up a facility like this. Obviously, there can be some advantages and some huge capital outlays and some disadvantages to these systems as well. But I guess one of the things, again, that we've seen a lot of farms exposed to during the last drought is a lack of flexibility in their feeding systems, which has meant that they haven't been able to access some of the opportunities, such as the soybean pellets, meal pellets, soybean hull pellets that came down out of the north, things like palm kernel that have become available at times, and again, better use of fodders that may be purchased. So again, I think important to review at this time, how your feed systems are set up if we move into a situation where we do start feeding a lot of hay, make sure we preserve as much of that as possible for going into cows rather than converting it to expensive bedding or garden mulch. Okay. So look, a few other factors to think about, and I think if you're patient, so we're nearly at the end there, there is the option for off-farm adjustment of heifers for many people, and we've seen the rates for this come down to be very competitive, back around that $1 a day rate for some people where, there's been large amounts of fodder available and people just cannot find cattle to graze them. The options out there for leasing land and additional water to potentially grow more feed and more crop. And again, purchasing standing feed from your neighbours has certainly been an option that some people we work with have taken, where there have been neighbours of small lot holders or people that are destocked that have got standing feed available. And again, taking a decision to cut that while it's still green and vegetative now can actually help fill their conserved forage larder very quickly for some farmers. But getting the most out of your dry land is really, really important. There can be an argument to conserve standing summer forage while it still has some quality. We know that it rapidly loses that value once it gets frosted, particularly what we call the C4 grasses or the summer type grasses. They can be a lot of standing feed there, but it drops very quickly from 8 or 9 megajoule feed to 4 megajoule feed with frost and dry weather. Still probably some opportunities if we have adequate soil moisture for some late cereal plantings and dry land, just to help support young stock and dry stock, and also to give the potential for forage conservation in spring. Again, looking at your destocking options are important, or restocking as the case may be. Agronomically, we do need to think very importantly about supply issues and some of these issues around COVID impacts. I think one of the important things that I would be doing is making sure that you have probably a month's supply of nitrogen fertiliser on farm in most situations at the least. I don't know if we need to panic and go much beyond that, but the challenge is when we get appropriate rain events and being able to get stock rapidly onto farm, can be significant. And it's important, particularly when we move into more frontal rain rather than coastal rain events, as we tend to transition into August and September, that people can move very quickly with fertiliser when those rain events come through for the 6 to 12 hours they do. All right, I've spoken enough. Thank you for your patience and listening. I'm not sure how many people are still there, but yeah. Any questions from the group, I guess, now, or anything that people want to discuss?
Yeah, I've got one question there for you, Mossy.
Beautiful.
It's sort of drought related, but sort of looking at all the stuff coming out of America at the moment with the COVID-19, how much do you think the effect of that will come overseas to Australia? When we're starting to look at what will be a very tough period, regardless of, especially for us with the water, regardless of COVID-19, and then sort of seeing the downturn of their industry over there. How much of that do you reckon will flow over here?
Look, I think the front end indication is that we're in a fundamentally different milk market here, Brad, and I guess particularly in the northern part of the country. I guess one of the unfortunate or the fortunate advantages of industry decline is that it's actually led to a reduction in milk supply. So I guess if we were as heavily leveraged towards export as we were when we were producing 12 billion litres, as we are now when we're producing under 9 billion litres, our exposure would be much higher as a total industry. At the moment, where supply is pretty tightly balanced. We're sort of arguably a net importer of milk at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have exposure to the export market, but it does mean we're less exposed to oversupply. How that manifests in spring will be interesting. I think in the northern parts, we're also to a degree protected by some of our supply arrangements and contracts, which have given us a reasonable guarantee 6, 12 months, even up to 2 years in advance on price, which is going to help significantly. And I think the other critical issue here is well, there's a couple of things. One is that the prevalence of the disease is much lower in Australia, so we have a lot less people affected, and at this stage, if things continue to be managed as they are now and the incidence of COVID doesn't increase, it looks like we've got a pretty high probability of our processes maintaining functionality. Sorry about that. And one of the issues they've had there is factories not being able to function because of people not turning up to work. The other thing that there is a large exposure to in America, we tend to do a little bit more home cooking here in Australia than they do in America. They've had a huge exposure there to both, the decline in things like the cheese markets over there associated with pizza and also takeaway milk markets. And also they've had a very big exposure to the school milk programs, again, which we don't have an exposure to as well, which may be a good or a bad thing. I guess in this instance, it's good because it means that we haven't developed a supply system around providing multiple millions of litres of school milk that wouldn't be there at the moment. So look, I don't see it as being as big an issue, Brad, as it is in the States. I can't see us getting to a point of dumping milk. And a lot of their production over there is around manufactured milk, but for fresh use. A lot of our manufactured milk use here, it's consumed internally, but we've also got good infrastructure here for drying milk as well that can be stored for longer term.
Can I add to that? I saw there's been indicative prices released in Victoria from Lactalis, which are minimised at $7 a kilo milk solids for Vic. So there's Lactalis and another company have released an indicative price for 1st of July at $7. So that sort of maintains where things are at the moment.
Yep, and I think if they're coming out and doing that, and that's sort of a bit contrary to that Rabo release that was waffling around in the media a week or so ago that was sort of indicating sort of fives, as opening prices. It's very much not in that space, which I think is a strong positive. If those companies are willing to go out hard this early, that's a good thing.
Neil, just in regards to grazing forage sorghums compared to cutting them and feeding them in hay racks, sort of the cost of cutting it compared to the wastage?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, Tim. I mean, we know that particularly as forage sorghum gets a little bit longer in the tooth, that the wastage rates on it can be extremely high. We also have, I guess, issues, with energetics of getting cows out to paddocks and losses associated with that. And there's a potential in a lot of facilities to feed that sorghum in areas near shade as well. So we can manage heat stress a little bit off the cut and carry systems compared to the graze systems. There's no doubt there's a cost, and I guess the cost comes back as to whether or not it's coming from your own labour and equipment, as opposed to paying a contractor to come in and regularly do that. So, I think that the standard that you'd look at with respect to costs would be somewhere, in the vicinity of $70 to $100 a tonne dry matter, depending whether you wrapped it or not, maybe up to 120 if you were wrapping it. But then, the improvements in utilisation can be, upwards of 30 to 40%. You go from utilising, maybe 60% to utilising 85%, depending on the wastage in your system. So Tim, I think it's system specific, cost specific, and facility specific. But increasingly, the option of controlled cut and carry, is worthy of review. I think the other thing you need to manage when you get into the cut and carry systems is the nutrient export aspects of those systems. We do tend to start carting, a lot of nutrient off paddocks, and particularly potassium in that space. And I guess it's one of the things which is often neglected when people move into high cut and carry systems. The hunter soils have traditionally been regarded as being very high in potassium to start with. Okay, and a lot of them it's still quite high, but we do see areas which are potassium responsive where it has been mined out over time. Kyle might have some comments on that, but I think, there are situations where long histories of hay cutting for many, many years, particularly in lucerne, has certainly led to depletion of potassium, but also, calcium as well.
Yeah, I think just, again, comes back down to other things we've said is, testing. Getting to know what you've got. Historically, you look at someone like Simo's place up there, Mossy, that you never apply potassium on the areas up there, and then you could go down to another paddock, and it'll be completely different. So really, it's get some tests done and see where you're at for those certain things.
Absolutely, and his sand across the creek was different to his black soil behind the dairy. Yeah. So I think understanding that's important with your nutrient balancing if you go to cut and carry systems as well. But look, Tim, that can be much more efficient, and it also depends on farm topography and how far you have to walk cattle to get them there. You know, we've got people walking cows 1.5 kilometres, 2 kilometres to pick up 4 or 5 kilos of dry matter, and then feed hay out in the paddock when they get there. The economics of that are reasonably questionable compared to bringing that back and feeding it in a central location.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Has anyone else got any comments or questions?
Oh, just a quick one, Neil. Just a comment. In those old lucerne stands, is it worth say blowing out the lucerne to preserve subsoil moisture?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Andrew. If your intention would be to summer crop on those, I think that lucerne's got an incredible capacity to mine out subsoil moisture for a long time, and you know, in the absence of not having any other crop in those over winter, if you were looking to build profile, and you can build a lot of profile on the heavy black soils, if there's nothing else there growing, you know, for sowing things like sorghum or maize in October, I would be removing anything and just putting those into a pretty solid hard fallow, you know, very much like we fallow any country to preserve moisture, and lucerne will mine it out through spring better than anything. So if your intention is to summer crop in ground that you're not using in winter and there's some marginal pasture on it, I'd advise to blow it out.
The other thing to probably add to that, the quicker if you do blow out a lucerne stand that you know you're not going to continue through, more available nitrogen is going to come about once the plant's actually dead rather than being alive. So if you are going to do that, you know, that's going to help, you know, obviously your summer crop, definitely.
Yep, yeah, no, that's terrific advice, Kyle. I think we just see a lot of these paddocks, as we all know, with, you know, a lucerne plant here and a lucerne plant there, you know, with a lot of water and effort being wasted on them, and I think there's a lot of better use for some of that country. You know, really good, strong stand of lucerne, got no issue with it at all. Can be a tremendous feed, and we've also always got the option of turning the water off on lucerne because it probably won't die. Okay, it'll probably persist, but you know, making good decisions over thinning stands is really important. And Andrew, making those decisions early, just as you've suggested, is I think critical. And you know, if we look, you know, we look to the northwest, you know, go to places like Moree and Walgett, when they get a lot of rain there, they don't let the weeds grow. You know, irrespective of what time of year it is, they're constantly banking moisture. And you know, if we move into a cropping type mentality, which is where we sort of go when we have limited water, it's all about moving moisture to a time of year where a plant can utilise it rather than wasting it on the journey getting there.
I've got one more for you, Mossy.
Good, Brad.
So when Tim was saying earlier about you know, sorghum and is it better in hay or standing, I was only having this conversation with Dad the other day. Can you do it as pit silage?
Yes. Yeah, you can absolutely do chopped sorghum as pit silage.
Is it worth the money?
Oh, look, it can be. It can actually be lower cost if the yields are right and the contractor structures are there. Generally, well-made pits probably come back in $30 to $40 a tonne dry matter, lower cost than round bale. Comes back then to having the appropriate downstream infrastructure to feed it out effectively. I mean, you guys have got a wagon, I know, but I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't got a pad. But it was more the idea of carting a heap of it up to Scone and putting in a bunker on the hill at Scone.
Yep.
Just because we've rarely got the food, like the feed safety up there, because it's all on wells.
Yep.
And sort of middle of last year, most of those wells had run out of water.
Yep.
So we had no feed up there at all. We've happened to come into a bit of moisture now, but
yep.
it got us thinking about, you know, because as I said, I did 2,000 bales down here in 2 weeks before planting. And it got me thinking, well, it's a big waste, like it's a big expense. And then putting them into round bales and then freighting them is sort of, you know, that's wasted freight because you're still, you know, your kilometre rate's way up because you're not getting a full load with round bales, with round silage bales as you would if we just did it into a tipper, into a B double and then cart it straight up and put it in a bunker.
I think on a dry matter basis, you'd need to look at that equation pretty carefully, Brad, because the bales are compacted, whereas the stuff going into your B doubles are going to be uncompacted, and you'd need to just really closely look at that on a tonne per dry matter basis. You'd probably be better to say, well, make the bales at home down there, and then bring them up in a B double.
Yep.
And do that in one hit. And yeah, look, I think the tonnage is a dry matter on I don't know the actual number, but intuitively, from well packed bales is going to be higher per shipping event than it will be from loose green chop to go into buns at home.
Yep.
If you're going to go home, you'd probably think about, even digging pits and doing a berry type scenario or the ridges.
That's what we were going to do up on the hill.
One of the advantages, I guess, of that, if you do a deep bury with it, is that you can store that product for a number of years, whereas bales obviously have got a finite shelf life, as do pits above the ground have a finite shelf life. So look, I think it's a good option, but you'd need to look very carefully, I think, at that economics of shipping. Green chop, would it be about 15k? Wouldn't it be nearly 20k?
Yeah, probably about 20k's. Way, so 40k round trip.
Yeah, you'd want to do your numbers on that, Brad. I think compared to B doubles full of round bales.
Yeah. No, just something different that we.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's a good suggestion, and having some storage up there would be a good advantage in the long term. Yeah. You fill Robin's shed with it, mate. Should be fine.
No, Dad's got a new hay shed.
Oh, has he?
Excellent. It's still not as big, but at least he's got somewhere to store hay now that doesn't have cows in it.
All good. All right. Anything else from the group?
Yeah, it's just in the chat section. I've put a couple of links there.
Now I haven't seen any chat section yet, so I better have a look at that. I'll pull that up. Sorry.
Yeah.
What have we got here?
The top one there is for your allocation announcements that will come out monthly. That's the industry.newsouthwales.gov.au one. And for anyone that wants to register for uncontrolled flow announcements and the like through Water New South Wales, that's the 1-800 number, and it's 1-800 662 077. So if everyone rings up and registers for that one, that's the important one for the uncontrolled flows.
Excellent, Scott.
Again, Scott.
It's 1-800 662 077.
Right. Okay, where are we?
And the Industry New South Wales one, you'll just have to go in, you type your email address in, and then you select the area you want the announcements for. So you just go down to Hunter, and that'll automatically come through to your email when they do the announcements. And they're predicting that there's going to be one around about the 28th of April.
Another announcement, Scott?
Yeah, just an indicative one, yeah.
Excellent. All right, team. Well, look, thank you for everyone's contribution and time, and for taking the time out of your busy days to get online. I think critically, everyone knows where we're heading, but there are a lot of decisions people can make now to set themselves up to be in a better position to manage what may lie beyond the 1st of July. There's enough good knowledge in the region that went through a lot of the wins and losses of 03 to 06 to draw down on, I think, and that's probably worth thinking about, particularly the younger farmers in the group that didn't go through that time, because it was pretty harrowing and challenging. And yeah, look, we'll leave it at that, and I will sign everyone off, I guess, at this stage. Thank you very much for your time.